get that up on a community site. Okay. All right. So, hi everyone. Welcome back for this second part of a AI governance chat. Um, there are notes and a set of slides that were shared in the previous one, but the brief summary allow me to do this is I think a general good standing phrase is what we took out of the first meeting, and this came from the gentleman Guyan Benedict, who wrote a paper about DAOs and governance in AI, who's not here today, but MIT fellow, Fulbright scholar, and Salesforce CTO in Australia. Human at the helm, AI in the loop is a decent basis for how one might want to consider what we're talking about. And how we conduct ourselves is potentially a reflection of how we conduct with AIs in governance settings. And last time I introduced the crew that was here in order to kind of skip the time-consuming part of introductions. So I just wanted to give another round of saying who's here and who's showing up for a first time, and that might help us get to a little more context setting. So generally, the group here is from the Project Catalyst ecosystem. Wolfram Blockchain Labs has a larger representation in the group here today with Joffrey, Arash, Mike Ye, and we're all working together on doing a number of different things inside of Project Catalyst and large language models and on Catalyst governance data. Who else is here? Let's say another set of individuals are, I would say, outside or aware of the Project Catalyst ecosystem in Cameron Foster and Ron Rivers. And these are two people that I've been connecting with over the past year who are doing some exciting things with AI in different governance and DAO settings. And so I would like to just highlight two things that I think they're doing really well and thinking about things in different ways. From Cameron's background, and Cam, I'm going to give you the floor just after this to say anything else. But Cameron is working on Foster AI and the Policy Genome Project, and essentially within a state government entity, trying to take the manuals of various state government organizations and having them talk to one another. And if you train an AI on the governance manual and then give it a voice and give it a set of prompts to respond, how would a conversation come out of that? I think that's a really interesting take on how one would animate a governance structure in a way that no individual human might be able to. So, Cam, thanks for being here. Please feel free to add anything else if you'd like in a brief statement.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for having me here. And I think you captured that really well. The way that that has continued to evolve is in having Mindcast, which is a round table where I have these animated policies in the form of at current federal level agencies for them to talk. But a lot of it is to leave a breadcrumbs and a conversation that can be traversable by the common civic person, right? But then I also wanted them to be able to talk to these policies themselves. And so I've made custom GPTs in the OpenAI library where I'm continuing to build these out based on their policies. And then I wanted a series where they could have individual base levels and then deeper conversations to kind of evolve out of that. So that turned into a new podcast called Code of Governance. And the first episode, I believe, is NIST, laying the foundation. And then further episodes, we would go deeper into their policies and what are the sources of policy lag. That's one of the big metrics that I'm kind of ticking to, is reducing the policy lag, or the time between when the world or the needs of the people have changed and how long it takes for that policy to adapt to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So really forward thinking stuff there. Thanks, Cam. And Ron Rivers, Ron wasn't able to make the first meeting, but I really love what Ron's doing. And Ron's coming from uh well, let's just say Spirit DAO, for which Ron founded, is in the Ethereum community. But what I think goes beyond any particular blockchain is how one introduces and implements AI into community governance and community actions and community sense making. So Ron developed SenseMaker AI, pulled that into a Telegram group. And so then the members are able to query to SenseMaker AI everything about the community, its values, the ways of operating. And it really kind of helps relieve some of the persistent questions that come from new community members. So that was a thought that, while there's a difference between a 25-person group and 1,000-person Telegram group on how they use it, it's still an interesting direction. And Ron does many other things too. He's an author. And well, Ron, maybe I could pass it to you to say anything else, because I'm not going to do a great job there.
I appreciate the introduction. Excited to be here today with all of you. And yeah, I'm just really fascinated, as Steph mentioned, about how we can leverage AI for like communal sense making, especially, with Spirit DAO. It's trained on all of our DAO documentation. It's trained on a text that my book, and then essentially in the larger vision is, as more members join and the meta spirituality project kind of expands, additional books are kind of trained, and then most importantly is how we kind of create feedback loops based on user feedback about, so user querying about specific queries. How does that relate to forecasting or predicting, let's say, events or opportunities for the community kind of better coalesce around the shared vision of the good? So how do we use AI to not only kind of foster community knowledge, but also suggest alternative directions, maybe things that we might be overlooking individually?
Yeah. Thanks, Ron. Okay. So those are two individuals that I know are pushing things forward in ways that can be applied within Project Catalyst and Cardano. One other person, and I'm going to refer to as Elder Millennial, who's here, is an active member inside of Cardano, and I believe submitted a proposal to Project Catalyst for how one would think about making the lives of DREPs better, more convenient, or more efficient when considering thousands of proposals. And I think what Elder Millennial did with MinSwap and how they thought about how to vote with the stake that was delegated to them is a really important use case. And so, Elder Millennial, please feel free to introduce yourself to whatever degree you feel comfortable. And then also, if you could talk a little bit about what you were doing at MinSwap, I think is the use of AI in that process would be helpful. And then we'll go back to the kind of summarization of the previous meeting and open it for people to give feedback.
Yeah, sure. So I am an AI engineer. So I've been working on Cardano for a little over a year now. Yeah, so we just had this opportunity come up with MinSwap, who had this cool idea for using their stake for voting on Catalyst. And as soon as I mean, this was Catalyst 10, so I think there was something like 1,500 or 1,600 proposals, and we had like a small team of like 7 or 8 people. And the question was, well, how do we sort through all of this? So yeah, I mean, I came up with a really quick way of trying to sort through all of the proposals. I wouldn't say it was perfect, but it was using a combination of doing things like language embeddings and clustering. So what it would do is it would try to cluster all of the proposals on a similar topic together. And then that way we could do things like there was an entire cluster on just, web comics for teaching people about Cardano. And we were like, well, our community is not interested in that kind of stuff. So we can immediately just brush these like 15 proposals to the side. So we actually were getting some interest from other groups as well. And I think there's far more advanced, ways of trying to go about trying to do this kind of stuff and try to integrate AI into, let's say, very relatively rudimentary things that you can do on Cardano. Just as an example, like if you could feed all like white papers for each project into a similar system, and then that way you have some kind of an AI that has a collective understanding of kind of like the space of projects on Cardano. I think there's anyway, the point is that I think there's a lot of opportunity to do even really basic things with AI, especially in the context of like DREPs. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you guys truly were taking the human at the helm, AI in the loop, but what it looked like was let's acknowledge what MinSwap participants, users are actually interested in. When we set the range of proposals in front of us and we see some are not what we care about, we can kind of just bucket them and remove. But then I think what you also did was for the proposals that were interesting or aligned with the mission of MinSwap users, you put 2 individuals or 2 humans to agree or disagree on if you would vote for that proposal or not. Am I getting that right? Because I think that's a good way of eliminating fluff, getting to the core mission, and then you have the humans still deciding, but really assisted by that tool.
Yeah. So that's a very good point. So I will first of all admit as an AI engineer, I am pretty skeptical about doing anything fully automated as AI. Like anything that we can do to improve transparency, I think is probably something that is probably to our benefit. But yeah, so to answer, what you were just talking to there very specifically, yeah, we had kind of a series of rounds of, this selection process. So the first one was just kind of like we had clustered proposals together, and then basically 2 people out of the group, or two people out of the group would be assigned to each cluster, and then they would just give like a thumbs up or thumbs down, and then that would decide whether or not like all of the proposals in that group would either pass or fail. And then in the next round, it was like, okay, of all the ones that passed, we would effectively do the same thing. I think there's more sophisticated ways of kind of approaching that, and actually the MinSwap community is actively working on refining that right now. So yeah, I mean anything that we could have in terms of discussion about how to help refine some of these methods, especially when there's a human at the helm. I think that would be super helpful.
Awesome. And welcome to those who just recently joined. We're just going around with some of the members that weren't here last week and wanted to introduce some of their projects and ideas. But the building off of what Elder Millennial just mentioned, would the group consider what MinSwap is a DREP, refer to it as a DREP, and the kind of the actions that it was taking is a DREP level action, and so it's not an individual, it is a collective? And is that generally how people are thinking about DREPs? Let me pose that question and also open the floor to anyone who wants to lead what this discussion should go towards. But I also have questions on screen, and I'm going to take some notes here about what things people want to talk about. But I think we eventually want to talk about DREPs as a guiding light to what an AI assistant to a human at the helm would be when thinking about governance. So I may have that orientation wrong or setting it up wrong, but please let me open the floor up to anyone who has thoughts there. Einstein, yes.
Hey, so as many of you know, I'm involved in delegate representative thinking and in the civics committee on Cardano. One of the things I'm thinking about currently is this thing about information overload. It's not a new problem, of course. It has been there all the time, but with AI, you suddenly have ways to categorize things. But the problem is then that the AIs becomes the gatekeepers unless you are able to control what those filters are. And when it comes to like DREPs as organizations using AI, I think clearly the answer is yes, that there are going to be organizational DREPs because it's just so much information. And how would you as a single person be able to vote on all of these different topics when we're talking about Cardano DREPs? You need a few things. For first, one thing, basic thing is like all of the governance actions need to be public domain. They need to be access free. They need to be copyright free, so you're actually able to categorize and index them through AIs. And then when you do this, then you need to be transparent on how you are categorizing this data so that you're suddenly not just gatekeeping everything, like one AI is hiding information from the public, basically. Yeah, I think that's my general thoughts on it, but the answer is yes, of course there will be organizational DREPs. Yes, of course they will use tools like AI to categorize information, or else there will be overload. We see this in Catalyst already with thousands of proposals that nobody can read all of them.
I was looking for my clapping hands gesture because I love that point about kind of the indexing, categorization, and structuring of data sets so that we make the equitable access to governance data so that it's not hidden behind a data scientist who needs to be able to pull the data sets out and then can do the work. It's that it's already exists in a data set, and then the average human can come to it with natural language and have a general confidence that what they're doing is accurate and informative. Kenrick?
You're muted.
Yes, right. Building on what Erskine said, this idea of information overload is really critical. We see that it's already difficult under Catalyst. We know it's going to get much worse with the Voltaire governance. And I think it is critical as a community that we shift towards DREPs and other voters being treated more like investors in decisions rather than allocating all of their voting weight to every decision. So if you look at a group like MinSwap, they have certain interests, and as Elder Millennial kind of indicated, they have other entire categories that they don't care about. So it would be I think the decision making would become a lot more effective, and DREPs and other voters would have to think a lot more carefully about their decisions if every time they allocate weight to one decision, that reduces how much allocation they have for other decisions. And that would be a way of absorbing the information overload. So DREPs would not be expected to vote on every decision. They would have a category, they would kind of define a suite of decisions that they found to be of high importance. And then delegators, would need to have the option of delegating across multiple DREPs as to how they want to proportion their own investment in decision making. Check.
Yeah. So eventually I did want to potentially get an update, and Chris, I'll tag you shortly on just Centranet DREP tooling, where we currently stand, just so that we can have an informed conversation here. If that's helpful or not, but I'm curious to know what is the state of what a DREP allowable functions are. I saw on Centranet there's documentation of that, but if it was somebody could summarize in a conversational format here what directionally what's useful to know there. But we'll get there eventually. Go ahead, Chris, and thanks for coming.
Yeah, hey guys, great to be here. And apologies if the sound is a bit rubbish. I'm outside walking the dog. Yeah, cool. So a couple of interesting points, and specifically around sort of agents and information overload. This idea of the hive mind is another concept that I think is pretty well embedded, whereby no one party needs to feel like they have to do everything, such as review all proposals. But where the hive mind really comes into its own is when it's able to share collective intelligence, and you're able to get management information to make you feel comfortable that I think that decisions are being made and the system is working well enough. So, I think to that end, if I imagine, how agents could work, it would be the bringing together of information into visualizations in simple ways, in dynamic, real-time ways, perhaps, with queryable, interactions, perhaps. But certainly so that it provides, whether it's a DREP or just a voter or just general user in governance, better indicators of the things that they don't have deep insight into, like the information overload problem, where you can't be expected to read through 1,500 proposals or something.
100%. I love that way of thinking. Chris, I was thinking about you before this, and I was wondering, I'm pretty sure you have a newborn now, and I was wondering, do you see it as like, everybody, we have these multinational companies trying to build artificial general intelligence, and you built one yourself pretty easily. Do you think of your own child as general intelligence? And we already have this is a fun question. We already have general intelligence. We don't need to be destroying the earth to find general intelligence on silicon chips.
The sense here, the status updates, is that you don't want to erode the next generation's liberties and abilities to be able to sense make themselves, and take away the pain of learning how to learn, right? That I think sits at the root of my thinking on everything these days. And as a result, sometimes I'm a little less tech friendly in certain instances, until we're in a position where we've got self-sovereignty over our data and our access and permissions in and out of online environments. I think we have to be very cautious. That's generally my take on everything these days.
think there's something profound in there because we don't, you know, we could hand over governance actions to AI in a way that it may make information gathering more efficient, but at the end of the day, the governance systems are for ourselves. And if we choose to replace ourselves, there's a large trade-off there. And perhaps erring on the side of not moving too fast in the governance decision-making direction is way more important than nailing the tools and being on the cutting edge. But
Yeah.
just a thought.
Got to understand how the decision was made in the first place, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Chris. I think Einstein, you were next.
I'll be short since elder millennials as well. I just want to go on with what Chris said. So I used to work as an educational psychologist, and one of the things I do when I do intelligence tests is I do it myself first and do all the calculations. Then I use a tool to do it later more effectively. I think the key here with AI is like the scoping of it. Like you need to have tools that scoped well for the job, like Chris mentioned, like visual tools and things like this that actually enables us more. But I think it's also crucial that we enable these governance actions to go at a human speed or at a human capacity. So when we're doing these things, we should not have 100,000 proposals that like you can't possibly digest all of this. Because you need to be able to quality ensure it, and you need to be able to be accelerated by the AI. Because that touches upon my problem with AI being gatekeepers. If only the AI can do it, that's when you have a potential problem.
I love that. Yeah. Chris, anything you want to follow up on that? Otherwise, then I was going to kick it to Elder.
All good.
Elder.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I just kind of want to build off of what both Chris and Einstein were saying. So you know, it's definitely true that there's information overload that goes on, and that's one of the principal reasons to use AI. However, we should never use AI in a way that is going to obfuscate I mean, exactly what you guys are saying. It's in a way that it's going to obfuscate like where this information is coming from, right? So like two of the key terms that I tend to like to use are transparency and traceability, right? So but I should also say that in order for you to be able to do things traceably and transparently, quite often you need to have some kind of a good user interface, whether that's like some kind of visualization or something. But you have to have a way to linking back to original documents that, you know, whatever it is that it's trying to make some kind of decision based on, some human can actually go and read it, right? And I mean, part of the reason why I think we need to do this is that we also, like, people also need to be able to go in and look through documentation and say, hey, listen, the AI missed this kind of stuff, right? I mean, that's something that we actually found even with our large language model clustering stuff, is that I mean, we even create an exception for this in the selection process, where we would say, okay, well, here's this cluster, right? But what we do when we go to do these clusters is that we also say, here's all the original proposals that we clustered together and that we actually generate a summary for. So it may say something like, this group of proposals is really built around like trying to improve mental health. But in there, you might see something about like smart contracts. And it's like, well, how did that get in there? Right. I mean, that could be some kind of a figment of some kind of a clustering issue. And, you know, as a result, you know, one of the things that we did is, you know, the human evaluators were able to say, okay, we're going to get rid of all of these proposals except for this one, because this one is actually relevant. Right. So there does have to be some kind of a mechanism for transparency and traceability in terms of how these things are making decisions. That way, you know, a diligent and dedicated human could go through and actually correct any of the mistakes that it might be making along the way. And we need good visualizations for that, or UI.
It's a good I would like to hear people's proposals about visualizations. Felix.
It ties a little bit what I planned to mention before. Actually, I think it's worth to do a whole study actually on what WinSwap did because there's so much good knowledge and practice already in place. Because by listening to it, I would say already actually what we can learn from it for DRAPs in general is a project which has an AI developer, they have definitely an advantage. So in WinSwap, we can, for example, okay, Elder Milan is there and you can drive such a process. Most of the projects, they don't have any AI developers, right? They also don't prioritize it maybe, but now we assume or can observe that as a DRAP in this regard with AI capacity, you have definitely an advantage. So you can perform much better than those who don't. In this regard, I think it's really important to make sure that actually we get better tools in a rapidly fast pace, making sure that we set capacity and resources aside to educate DRAPs on how to use AI tools properly as well. Because also in this regard, it's awesome to have the best tools if you don't teach how to use them properly, also from experiences which have been done, like WinSwap, for example, and not lose these experiences then actually. I think this is really important to and everything what can help education, if it's visualizations, if it's well-structured data sets for all things, governance, whatnot. But yeah, should be designed with the focus to say, okay, let's build this also in an educational manner.
Thanks, Felix. Ron.
On building on Felix's point, I'm just curious if any of you are experimenting with building learning tracks within the AI. So this is something we're doing. I have like built a wrapper product that I'm kind of launching actually this week, but it's targeted towards nonprofits. So typical like grassroots 501c3s. So part of like what we wrote into it is essentially a help track. So they give a /command help, and then we have kind of a branching pathways of how the language model can teach the lay person how to speak and prompt correctly to the language model. So we integrated that as part of the product. So assuming that someone who had it in their model, they're just like on their phone, because it's like a mobile, you've been embedded into mobile. They can just be like, oh, help me like learn how to use this thing. So I've never used AI. I'm running a food bank, right? I have no idea. So I think I'm curious if any of you guys are experimenting with that, or if you've played with it at all, because initial feedback and full disclosure, we're like literally launching next week. So I have my first like session today. But so far this feature's been well received. So I'm curious if anyone's been experimenting with that.
Anybody want to throw in thoughts there?
So, I mean, I guess so I'm not going to say that I have experimented with that directly. However, there are definitely techniques I've experimented with, not so much to teach humans how to make better prompts, but rather to allow the AI to actually engineer its own prompts, right? To try to get back kind of to like the source of what the human is trying to ask. So there's some techniques out there I've been playing around with, like graph of thoughts and like self-consistency type things that I have found to be incredibly useful at trying to take some kind of a user input or question and kind of like reformulate it in a way that seems to be gives you a better answer at the end of the day. So that's about as close as I've gotten.
Danny, you put something in chat, and I'm curious if you'd like to expand on it at all. No worries if not.
Hey, apologies. I tried to turn on the camera, but my computer is not cooperating today. Yeah, that was just within the realm, and I think we've seen conversations in the community as well in that interim period, what that looks like, what it shows and tells us about, the upsides and pitfalls of the DRAP implementations and whatnot. And I think to the degree of like what's currently taking place, it's a very nice precursor of like how the DRAPs could function and what that could look like, when the voting power is pooled, whether, it's min swap. I think we've seen Liquid Labs participate this time around as well. But I think in the interim period, I think it's definitely important to keep in mind, like to what degree the participants are aware that their voting power is being used in such and such manner, and to what degree there is that consent relationship between the holders, like me participating in in a DeFi protocol. Am I aware that the DeFi protocol itself might be using and leveraging then the voting power from whatever amounts I might have in smart contracts or all those different things, yield programs, and how is that being used forward, and whether I am aware about those things. So I think that's an important note to keep in mind, which once the DRAP program is up and running, whether it's on the Voltaire side of the things or eventually also within the Catalyst, I think that's a more profound consent in a way, because there is that action of an active delegation to do that. But I think just to be broadly aware that like we have this gap at the moment between like current state, what we're seeing in Catalyst, versus what that final version of DRAP will be presenting, right? Like, are users aware? And then essentially, do they have a say in terms of like how do they participate and whatnot?
Thank you. And just for those unaware, Danny and Chris are part of the Project Catalyst. I would say management team, I guess, is what you call it. But Danny, it's always interesting to hear your opinion, because who is receiving more feedback than you are, at the ground level in the trenches. And oftentimes that leads me to wondering, for a person who, if we were to make a Danny Ribard double to answer those questions that you see most often, how much time back in your day would we get? And then what higher level functions would you be able to take on if that was not the thing that I'm sure you love a lot of it. I'm sure at some level there's a tedious part, and then there is also higher level things that you're able to detect that others may not be. And so if there was something to alleviate a large time of responding there, and I know there's a team doing this, but I'm just, it always brings me back to contemplating, what if there was more than one Danny Ribar, or in for hand holding purposes or whatever. Do you have any thoughts there?
Absolutely. I think, and we might have spoken about like the similar topics, like in number of town halls and breakout rooms. And obviously, if you want to scale the program in such a way that it's comfortable and in a way that it can support individuals and grow, it can be done through like a bottlenecks. I would even call myself sometimes a bottleneck. And I think when each one of us participates in the early ways, like that generally is okay. But then as you grow and scale and you go in all those different directions, we all ultimately become in one way or another bottlenecks. And the challenge is to figure out, how do we extend the knowledge further? How do we train and lift other individuals, organizations that basically help shelve some of that load? And I think one of those, things where it definitely makes sense, like, what are those, like, I don't want to call them boring, fundamental questions that people need to be aware of, things like timings, parameters, things of that nature that essentially are generally easy and informational from the factual perspective, that could then allow us, that could be outsourced and probably should be like to an AI agent. Like we talk through the lenses of, guidelines and rules when we think about the Git book, right? Like Git book is a large document. You can think of it that way right now. Like, what is a better way to resurface information to them? How can you make it a bit more or less complex? What is it, the pathway to get the answers to people as fast as possible? So that, like, when we're discussing on the factual basis, everybody has the same input information, and that basically democratizes the access to that information, that we can all have those higher level function conversations based on accurate input, first of all, and before basically spending majority of the time of covering the inputs and then having very little time to actually, you know, brainstorm and talk about those higher functions, higher strategies, and things of that nature. So that's always keenly on our minds, and definitely AI is something that could help with streamlining that somewhat if done cleverly, I guess. It comes back to the fact, information overload, you know, things may be overwhelming, and, you know, these things are still prevalent within the ecosystem, and they're not getting easier because we're getting more and more people in the Cardano at large. There's more and more different varieties of projects, peoples, and what's not. And, you know, just like, you know, many years ago, I would count people on a couple of hands. It's impossible to do that today, right? So, like, how do you decentralize that effectively to ensure that people can still participate and actually build agency? Because then if you don't build the environment that basically supports the agency of individual, sooner or later they're going to be looking for alternatives. Where else have I experienced a better agency that I want to basically spend my time, energy, and life basically around to build upon?
I think that's a huge point. And we have to balance that with an evolving Catalyst landscape, because obviously, like, Catalyst isn't in its final iteration. It is this thing that upgrades every round. And so with upgrades comes new standards, or new, even as simple as new proposal questions that are different in Fund 12 than Fund 11, makes for the data set a bit less structured, or a bit less, it requires more of the manipulation to then standardize those data sets so that we can ask questions across the history. And of course, in the first, you know, dozen funds from 1 to 12, there's probably going to be the majority of changes are happening now. And so standardization is the most difficult right now. A question that I asked my team is, like, let's say Catalyst is going for another 100 funding rounds. When we're thinking about giving somebody access to question, query, visualize historically 100 funding rounds, what did we need to structure in terms of data to enable an AI, to enable the transparency, to enable the visualizations that many people have mentioned, in a way that it's not manual work for every round? And I think that's a big open question, because, you know, we're evolving, we're upgrading. Yeah. Einstein.
I think this comment will build a bit upon what has been said so far. I'm concerned about marrying the social and the code. So what the actions with the actual codes you do. And Ron Rivers talked a little bit about it when he's making prompts that's helping the user with their social input, and then helping adjust the code based on it, how you will actually then prompt. But I will go much further. I will talk about the data sets we have on all of these governance actions. They need to be transparent, traceable, accountable. They need to have appropriateness, and they need to have appealability. If you do all of these things for all of the social actions and everything that's on-chain on the blockchain, you have harmonization between social and code, and then you have something that AI tools can greatly use, and it's beneficial to the human users as well. So really how we think about how to structure the data sets, and beginning with that, like the road you're making, that's what's going to help you on the journey. So I think that's something partly missing on some of these debates with AI. It's like when we think about this, think really about the data and how we structure that data, and make sure it's available to everyone. So again, like a public domain, and make sure it's traceable, accountable, all those things I said. If we do that, then we have a system that will work well and accelerate us humans.
Elder said in the chat related, Liquid used the same system that he developed for MinSwap. Don't know of the details of how they used it, but they didn't advertise publicly. Okay. Can you repeat your criteria? Einstein, yes. Okay, I think. Kenrick, I didn't hear you or see you put a hand up at all, but I'm always interested in some things that you might have to say. So is there anything on top of mind from your point of view?
Well, I think the discussion's been very interesting. So I don't really have anything to add right now. I kind of would just amplify what Chris said about, I think the social insects, in a sense, are another good model to look at for these kinds of things. And the point is that we're all agents in a very large system, and the AI can be viewed as another complementary agent in this system. And there needs to be ways, when we look at decentralization, that doesn't mean that all of us have to participate in every activity. And there needs to be judicious ways in terms of way we balance access versus defining teams that are kind of focused on particular problems.
And okay, I like to be respectful of people's times. We have about 7 minutes before I was planning to wrap up. I'm curious if we know of parameters that, for a DREP, for instance, when I do stake my vote, can I stake in a 30% capacity, or a third to 3 different DREPs, or 1% to 100, or 50% to others and 50% to myself? Are those parameters known?
There are
What we can
parameters
do?
already. There are parameters for the first, let's say, setup, and on the beginning, it's, I think, mostly wallet based. So like everything what you have on your wallet in this regard to a DREP. But everything will definitely, I think, evolve in the direction you mentioned, right? So I can use one asset, can use whatnot, and delegate across multiple representatives. And I think that's most likely future own projects will actually come up with and provide, right?
Okay.
But there are
And
some thresholds, mostly for, let's say, for example, registered ADA for voting. There are specific, I can send you a link where you can look on some of the specific DREP parameters.
Is that stuff here mostly on the CentroNet documentation, Felix? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you. I know in the way that we've been trying to standardize historical catalyst data is an open challenge that we've been working on. We've been working on with Darlington. We've shared some data sets back and forth. I know that Elder Millennial has been, use a full proposal data set is important, because what I think's typically been available has been, the solution, the problem statement, and the summary. But that while that might be the majority of representing the idea, it doesn't get the whole lot of what's possible to know about every proposal. And so then structuring that data set, you know, just trying to bring that all together has been something that we've been working with Lido back and forth on. And I think that's one of the main things that when people talk about the data sets being transparent, traceable, accountable, that type of thing being standardized from Fund 1 through Fund 100 is going to be a challenge across the board. But that's an attempt that we're trying to make, because we are trying to pull that data set into an LLM workflow and then, you know, make those visualizations or make something that is, well, here's the data set, here's the code that it wrote to explore it. It's a SQL query. And then here's the output. Can you confirm that the output was accurate? Yes. And is it useful? And those are all still open questions very much, but the workflow is at least, like, we're learning each day how to make that workflow better. And one of the other directions that Wolfram's doing is obviously, like, the best LLMs are these large closed source pay for the tokens, but there's also a set of open source lightweight models that we're trying to make available to be able to swap in data sets, swap out, run on your own local computer, and test them to see which ones perform best based on the Catalyst data. And that's something we're exploring in our milestone 3. And that's just an ongoing project that I want people to be aware of. Yeah.
Actually, the quick question, because I think so far most of the conversation really turns around LLMs, right? In this context, that does anybody has an idea on another AI model which may play a role besides LLMs actually?
Say again, what was the question, Felix?
Has anybody a good idea on the use cases for other AI tools than LLMs in governance?
Not a good use case, but I was looking at Microsoft's VA model that came out this week, which was you give the model one image, it produces the video, and I was just thinking, how far could we take an adversarial AI through the Catalyst process in order to reveal if the humans doing proof of human can detect it or not? And it might be a way of, you know, red teaming, the phrase is used, to try to find out if the Catalyst process is robust to someone doing a complete AI from start to finish, proposal, proof of human type of thing. And if you do that out in the open, you know, you could mitigate some of the, you wouldn't want to do this in secret, but it might reveal the weak places in the Catalyst process that might help us, like, defend the system better. So it's not a tool in the way that I think you were talking about, Felix, but like, we need to think about this open public protocol from an adversarial point of view, for sure.
It's like a Turing test of the process. That's interesting.
We're
Yeah,
at time, but let's get last words in for anyone, and for everyone else who has to run and drop off. I appreciate you guys for coming, so thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I was just going to say really quick, to that question about LLMs. I mean, it depends. I think what you mean by LLM. We can maybe talk about this more another time. But we really just, I guess you can call it an LLM, to generate embeddings and then do clustering, and that's outside of an LLM. right? So anyway, yeah, we can, I realize we're at time, so anyway.
You're broadening the definition of what's falls under the category of AI, which is what Felix is asking about. I mean, Felix, do you have you kind of want to know what's the edge here? What's beyond large language models that we could be thinking about here? And yeah,
Agents and directors.
Yeah, agents do. That's so interesting. Agent swarms.
agent swarms. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll carry this meeting forward. I think this timing generally worked. A lot of good notes came out of it. Thank you everyone for coming and sharing. Felix, let's have a chat to see what would be a good potentially I know a directed conversation for the next one, just so that we can potentially just get to another level of questions that's we've done some brainstorming. Now where do we go from here, type of thing. Anyway, I'm gonna have to kick you all out of this room because we have another meeting to run, so please drop off when you can, but thank you again, and I'll share these notes outward. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for hosting, Steve.
Thanks. Likewise.
Hello.
Hello.